This is a reading of your Jury Charge Performance Challenge for week number 4. Members of the jury, you are now the jury in this case, period. I want to take a few minutes to tell you something about your duties as jurors and to give you some instructions, period. At the end of the trial, I will give you more detailed instructions, period. You must follow all of my instructions in doing your job as jurors, period. This criminal case has been brought by the United States government, period. I may sometimes refer to the government as the prosecution, period. The government is represented at this trial by an assistant United States attorney. The defendant is represented by his attorney, period, paragraph. The defendant has been charged by the government with a criminal violation of a federal law, period. The charge against the defendant is contained in the indictment, period. The indictment is simply the description of the charge made by the government against the defendant, but it is not evidence that the defendant committed a crime, period. The defendant pleaded not guilty to the charge, period. The defendant is presumed innocent and may not be found guilty by you unless all 12 of you unanimously find that the government has proved the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, period, paragraph. The defendants in this case are being tried together, period. But you will have to give separate consideration to the case against each defendant, period. Each is entitled to your separate consideration, period. Do not think of them as a group, period. The first step in the trial will be the opening statements, period. The government, in its opening statement, will tell you about the evidence which it intends to put before you, so that you will have an idea of what the government's case is going to be, just as the indictment is not evidence, neither is the opening statement evidence, period. Its purpose is only to help you understand what the evidence will be and what the government will try to prove, period, paragraph. After the government's opening statement, the defendant's attorney may make an opening statement, period. At this point in the trial, no evidence has been offered by either side, period. Next, the government will offer evidence that it claims will support the charges against the defendant, period. The government's evidence may consist of testimony of witnesses as well as documents and exhibits, period, paragraph. Some of you have probably heard the terms, quote, circumstantial evidence, end quote, and, quote, direct evidence, period, close quote. Do not be concerned with these terms, period. You are to consider all the evidence given in this trial, period. After the government's evidence, comma, the defendant's lawyer may make an opening statement and present evidence in the defendant's behalf, comma, but the lawyer is not required to do so, period. I remind you that the defendant is presumed innocent and that the government must prove the guilt of the defendant beyond a reasonable doubt, period. The defendant does not have to prove his innocence, period. If the defendant decides to present evidence, comma, the government may introduce rebuttal evidence, period, paragraph. After you have heard all the evidence on both sides, comma, the government and the defense will each be given time for their final arguments, period. I just told you that the opening statements by the lawyers are not evidence, period. The same applies to closing arguments, period. They are not evidence either, comma, but you should pay close attention to them, period. The final part of the trial occurs when I instruct you about the rules of law which you are to use in reaching your verdict, period. After hearing my instructions, comma, you will leave the courtroom together to make your decision, period, paragraph. Your deliberations will be secret, period. You will never have to explain your verdict to anyone, period. Now that I have described the trial itself, comma, let me explain the jobs that you and I are to perform during the trial, period. I will decide which rules of law apply to this case, comma, in response to the questions or objections raised by the attorneys as we go along, comma, and also in the final instructions given to you after the evidence and arguments are completed, period, paragraph. You must follow the law as I explain it to you, whether you agree with it or not, period. You and you alone, comma, are the judges of the facts, period. Therefore, comma, you should give careful attention to the testimony and exhibits, comma, because based upon this evidence, you will decide whether the government has proved, comma, beyond a reasonable doubt, comma, that the defendant has committed the crimes charged in the indictment, period. You must base that decision only on the evidence in the case and my instructions about the law, period, paragraph. You will have the exhibits with you when you deliberate, period. It will be up to you to decide which witnesses to believe, comma, which witnesses not to believe, comma, and how much of any witness's testimony to accept or reject, period. I will give you some guidelines for determining the credibility of the witnesses at the end of the case, period. The defendant is charged with a crime, period. I will give you detailed instructions on the law at the end of the case, comma, and those instructions will control your deliberations and decision, period. But in order to help you follow the evidence, comma, I will give you a brief summary of the elements of the offense which the government must prove to make its case, period, paragraph. During the course of the trial, comma, do not talk with any witnesses, comma, or the defendant, comma, or with any of the lawyers in the case, period. Please do not talk with them about any subject at all, period. You may be unaware of the identity of everyone connected with the case, period. Therefore, comma, in order to avoid even the appearance of impropriety, comma, do not engage in any conversation with anyone in or about the courtroom or courthouse, period. I know you want to be friendly with everyone, comma, but please follow this rule when you are away from this jury box and still in this courthouse, period, paragraph. Also, be careful when you leave here and go home, period. You must not talk about this case with your family or anyone who wants to know about what you are doing, period. Tell them that you have been instructed to not talk about this case with anyone outside of the jury room, period, paragraph.